Well, thank you very much. And dear State Secretary, dear mayors, dear colleagues, Lamia, firstly, yes, my sincere apologies for not being there with you in person this morning. On arriving at Gare du Nord in Paris this morning to get onto the train to Brussels, I was met with the news that the train had just been cancelled. And sadly, two trains don't easily get into one. So there was not much chance in getting into the next train. So my sincere apologies, but it was sadly outside of our control. So please let me welcome you all very warmly, though virtually, to this session on tackling inequalities and rebuilding the social contract in cities. The OECD is proud to support the Brussels Urban Summit through our Champion Mayors for Inclusive Growth initiative, together with the Brussels Capital Region, Eurocities and Metropolis. Thank you in particular to Pascal Smet, State Secretary of the Brussels Capital Region, and also to the Mayor of Brussels, Philip Close, for hosting this summit. The work you do as leaders of local governments across our cities is incredibly important in terms of the direct impact on the daily lives of citizens. At times of crisis, local governments are on the front lines, invariably, in support of the emergency response, in providing essential services and ongoing support. As our colleagues, Mayor Fatima Sahin of Gaziantep, Mayor Vitaly Klitschko of Kiev, Mayor Andriy Sadovi of Lviv, and Mayor Carolina Kose of Montevideo can attest. Your cities have shown remarkable resilience in the wake of the tragic earthquakes in Turkey, Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine, and indeed, tragically, in the context of the floods in Uruguay. Cities are also engines of economic growth. Over the last 2 decades, metropolitan areas accounted for nearly 70% of GDP growth across OECD countries. They're powerful magnets for skilled workers, and they attract the most productive and innovative firms thanks to their access to markets, infrastructure and services. However, barriers to equality of opportunity can hold back the potential of our cities and the potential of people living in our cities. For instance, in Santiago de Chile, in Warsaw and across Greater London, the disposable income of the top 20% of earners is between 7 and 13 times higher than that of the bottom 20%. These disparities are partially reflective of the success of cities in attracting and indeed creating high earners. But they can also reflect structural barriers, such as disparities in the quality of infrastructure, access to public services, employment opportunities, and so on, which hamper merit-based social mobility. For instance, in cities such as Madrid, Milan, and Paris, people living in high-income neighborhoods have access to 25% more shops, both by car and by public transportation, within a 30-minute radius compared to those living in lower-income areas. The opportunity to get ahead and to build a better life based on reward for effort and skills is at the heart of the democratic promise made to citizens in open market-based democracies. And an important driver to help achieve this objective is indeed having the right policy mix for cities. First, in improving access to opportunities through better transportation infrastructure, dare I say it, reliable, efficient transportation infrastructure, including public transportation, provides access to jobs, education, and public and private services. It can also significantly boost economic growth, particularly when combined with good intercity connections. Our analysis shows that a region's GDP will increase by, on average, 2% for every 10% increase in its access to markets through better transportation connections, such as better highways, rail, or port connections. Local governments are, of course, critical to the planning, operation, maintenance, and financing of transport infrastructure, making, on average, 41% of the public infrastructure investments across the OECD. The OECD's standards and policy advice can help local governments ensure quality, value for money, coordination with other levels of government, and environmental sustainability in infrastructure projects. Our recommendation on the governance of infrastructure, for example, highlights how different levels of government can effectively work together throughout the life cycle of an infrastructure project. For example, with formalized consultation processes and explicit co-financing arrangements. Second point, removing regulatory and policy barriers to housing affordability. Over a third of low-income tenants spend more than 40% of their income on rent. Land use regulations are essential for avoiding negative externalities in cities, such as noise and air pollution from industrial activity, affecting living conditions in residential areas, or the loss of the historical character of an area. However, overly restrictive land use regulations are also a leading factor behind increasing costs of housing. Restrictions on density without a specific policy justification should be lifted where that is possible. And our analysis shows a direct and unequivocal link between the level of build-up density and lower housing prices. The more flexible zoning regulations, including fewer restrictions on the construction of multi-family residential buildings, could help ensure the supply of housing evolves with evolving demand. Removing single-use zoning would also help ensure greater accessibility of shops and services by, for example, allowing grocery stores to open up in residential areas. Third, improving energy affordability and households' resilience to energy shocks by decarbonizing homes. The energy cost crisis triggered by Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is a stark reminder of the need to diversify sources of energy supply while accelerating the green energy transition and reducing energy demand to minimize the risk of energy price shocks and energy poverty. Housing decarbonization can both strengthen household resilience by reducing the impact of fossil fuel price shocks while contributing also to our net zero objectives. While total emissions from housing have declined by 17% on average across the OECD over the last 2 decades, they remain substantial. 1/4 of OECD country emissions, in fact. Local governments can help accelerate progress in our cities here on this front by empowering households with more information, by extending energy performance certification rules to all properties, not just those for rent or sale, and by building new social housing units according to high environmental standards, and by renovating existing social housing units to improve efficiency. The OECD's Housing Policy Toolkit and our upcoming publication, Brick by Brick, Better Housing Policies, which will be launched later this week, I should say, provides guidance for policymakers on the design of these policy measures. In closing, cities are engines of economic growth, and your local governments play a central role in ensuring that all of your residents can participate in and benefit from the opportunities they create. I very much look forward to hearing the outcomes from your discussions on this front on how we can together help develop even better policies for better lives. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words.